Hey there, my name's Mark McCartney and welcome to the What is a Good Life podcast. Over the last couple of years, I've interviewed over 150 people around this question. Not in an effort to provide a universal answer to this question, but to provide you with tools and content that help you find and define your own answer. Well, I'm also trying to provide you with what I perceive to be more genuine expressions of the human experience. In the 10th episode of the What is a Good Life podcast, I'm joined by Baiba Rubesa. Baiba is a business executive and leader across several industries, from natural resources, banking, automotive, telecoms, and most recently rail and transport, in which she also served as the chairperson and CEO of Rail Baltica. In this episode, Baiba takes us through her fascinating life of growing up in Germany and Canada, born to Latvian parents with a dream of supporting our homeland, to ultimately being a part of a revolution in Latvia later in life, from being the only woman on many boards to supporting women's economic empowerment, as she currently serves as a co-founder of Novatore, all while sharing her thoughts on the golden rule, seizing the day, intuition, pivoting, and focusing on one's strengths. I wanted to interview Baiba because I think she's lived a really unique life, and one I learned a lot from listening to her own reflections on life, as I'm sure you will too. And if you enjoy this conversation, please like, share, and subscribe, as I greatly appreciate your support at this stage of my podcasting journey. So without further ado, the 10th episode of the What is a Good Life podcast. So, Baiba, thank you so much for joining me today. I was very much looking forward to having this conversation with you, to reconnect with you, but also, more importantly, to hear your views on the topic of life, what is a good life, and so forth. So I'm very grateful to have you here today.
Well, it's a pleasure, and I'm tickled pink that you thought of me. So, as I've heard some of the previous speakers are mainly men, which is always interesting. And yeah, okay. Go ahead.
Trying to rebalance that in the infancy of this podcast, Baiba. So you'll be
Very
seeing more
smart.
you'll be seeing more balance
Very.
as we move through. Baiba, the first question I have for you is, what question are you trying to answer as you move through life?
I've never actually thought of life that way, and I'm not probably as introspective as many who know me would assume. I think there would be. I just want to have what seems to be a good life to me. And an interesting, compelling, scintillating, adventurous, life. We can always get into whatever that means. I think if there is sort of in hindsight, more than foresight, um, I was brought up. I mean, I live in Riga in Latvia. I was born and I grew up in Canada. And I've also spent a lot of time in Germany growing up. But the one thing that our parents instilled in us, this is still in Soviet times, or in other words, in the 20th century, was a responsibility for a free and independent Latvia, if not Baltic states, if not, the collapse of the communist system. But certainly a very profound love towards a country I wouldn't see for a very long time, etc. And certainly half of my life, and I'm almost 69 now, has been about uh, working on ensuring that Latvia is a free, democratic, flourishing country and people. I'd say if there is a question, that would certainly be the one. I think that the other one is, in general, again, more in hindsight, is one of being very committed to enacting the human rights anywhere actually in the world in different ways. And now that I'm 69, you kind of wonder how long life will be, and be it with a pandemic or with anything, you kind of know that your days are numbered. I'm not waiting for the Grim Reaper to arrive by any stretch of anybody's imagination, but it's a question of how to, spend the next decade or two, in a way that's truly enjoyable.
Well, there's lots you've covered there. In terms of this sentiment that I really enjoy or liked hearing, this idea that maybe it's been scintillating more in hindsight rather than in with foresight. How do you kind of see yourself moving through life then in that sense, like, you know, in terms of what can be planned and what you've just noticed is just kind of surfacing or you're dealing with as you move through life?
I think people in general are driven by their personalities, and,
Yeah.
and what forms them to a large extent. I'm a very positive extrovert, generally, optimistic person. My husband always says he never ceases to amaze him where I can find something positive in a disastrous, situation. So my being happy-go-lucky, I would say, not totally happy-go-lucky. I'm a Taurus, and a horse by the two different horoscopes that are out there. So I have, my 4 feet legs are very much on the ground, but they also know how to run, and do things and enjoy life. Taurians are all about, you know, joy, very hands-on joy. So I think that the scintillating part is that uh, I'm not one who ever planned my life. I neither planned the career nor anything else, and have gone down a path that has been unbelievably good to me. So uh, I don't know how to respond to that question, in any other
Yeah.
way. I think that whether it's from the Christian faith or from any other faiths, I think if this is, do unto others what you want, what is it, done to yourself? That's the wrong end, but the idea is clear. And I actually think that works. I think, yeah, that you need to figure out how if you're good to others, life will be good to you. If you help others, you will be helped when you need it. And fate, it's never a very direct equation, ever. It doesn't kind of work. I'll give you, 3 oranges and I'll get the 3 oranges back. That's not how this works. But I think that
Yeah.
in general, people who are good get goodness back, and evil people, not all of them, but a lot of them, get back what they've done as well in the course of a lifetime. So, it's stay awake. But again, I'm very extrovert as well. I love reaching out to the world around me, whether it's intellectually or physically or whatever. And by the same token, I think there are a lot of people who are very introverts. I have siblings. I have a husband like that where it's just different, and they have very different lives in many ways as well. So it kind of depends. It's one day that if COVID had two extremely tough jobs, um, taught me, to honor the AA top rule, which is one day at a time. And I really think one day, when the world seems to be just a disaster around you, and you don't know, where to start and where to end, this one day at a time, break it down, break it down, break it down. I've never seen a 5-year plan ever realized in business or anywhere else. Too much happens for the 5 year. It's good to have, I think, those ambitions or a goal or whatever it is that, within 5 or 10 years, I'll be this or that or do this or that. But but the main thing is to understand that will change. It's only guidance. That's all that it is.
So hold your plans lightly almost.
Yeah, yeah. I think revise your bucket list on an annual basis, because you change, the world changes. If anything, COVID had everybody reflect for at least 2 seconds, if not longer. What is life about? Where do I want to be? Whom do I want to be with? What will I do afterwards? What is actually of value, you know, really to me? And each individual has very different answers to that.
And just knowing your career and the success you've had, and I'll be on the intro to this podcast, I'll be the audience are well aware
Okay.
of who you are, and what you've done. But how, just in terms of this, not a 5 year plan, like Did you have a North Star as you moved through your career?
No,
Or is that never?
no, it was never, I want to be, president of a conglomerate. This was never the ambition, ever. I'm really surprised by a lot of the things that I've actually done, to be honest. But they seem very natural when they happened. So, it's sort of it's going down the yellow brick road and understanding, at times you, I've realized that the most rational decisions I've made have been usually the stupidest and or the most fraught, whereas those that come with a good dose of intuition have been correct for me. So the path went, where it wasn't flawless by any stretch of the imagination. I think the incremental parts, in a business point of view, for sure, it is kind of, we need to achieve X by Y, but I know that even that changes; those goalposts change. But I am a totally unplanned in my career. My plan was to have 10 kids, a husband, a home, somewhere. And it's none of that. Absolutely none of that. And but that's when I was around 20, and things just changed. So
I think there's a quote by a lady called Margaret Atwood who says,
yeah.
when nothing is certain, everything is possible." Uh,
Yeah, but
kind of spring
that's
into mind.
true. But I think that's very, 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 very true. I find women, I mean, I don't have my own children. I met a partner that I really wanted to live with rather late in life, who had already had, 4 daughters, kind of a thing. He's an actor, and I always, when I was a younger, sort of from 35, 45, somewhere thereabouts, uh, uh, leader of an organization, I was astounded at what women are capable of doing, that are highly motivated, especially in the post-Soviet world, where they were highly motivated, fantastic at the work that they did. They always had young kids at home, still going on to even more education of something or other at university, and usually taking care of their own parents and or their husbands or partners' parents. And I had no idea, I still don't understand how they were able to do that. But it's possible. And if I look at, I mean, I am certainly more concerned about the plight of women than men on the average. But and when I see what women well, have to bear is kind of too negative, but the kind of things that in different parts of the world women are confronted with. For example, in Afghanistan today, it's beyond comprehension. Beyond comprehension. I I founded this women's movement in our region, and then we did a summit last year where a lot of it was concentrated on business women in Ukraine. But I also connected with a woman in Afghanistan, because I think when you're talking about post-war situations, and we are for sure in a war post-war situation in ever so many ways, connected with this stunningly beautiful, well-educated young woman, let's say from a prominent Afghani family, and spoke to her online, of course, Kabul to Riga. Amazing that even worked, frankly. Um, and now when I see, and at that point, a couple of rights had already been taken away, and she and her, especially her mother, founded a charity that educates Afghani women, which means they learn to read, to count, and they learn some sort of a skill, whether it is baking pancakes on the street or tailoring or fixing, or very, very, very simple, good things. But that in that way they could finance their families. There's Professor Linda Scott has written several studies and several books about this, where she does studies, and you see what I'm an extremely privileged woman in more ways than one. And when you see what happens, even first of all with uneducated women who are deeply poor, and then you have educated women who are completely aware of what is being done to them, is I find all of that very shocking. So the question is, how do you deal with it? I mean, we have a war in Ukraine, a brutal, unnecessary, violent war. And in all wars, also, I mean, nothing against male soldiers, don't get me wrong. But, the scope of rape and violence, apart from being a soldier, whether you're a man or a woman, and terror and all of that, I just find it unbelievable. We're back to the 19th and 20th centuries, and that's like 500 kilometers from here.
Yeah, it's staggering, kind of the chasm between our, like, even stepping back from humanity and just thinking our most loving and our most destructive behaviors. And just even when you were mentioning there, though, like the focus you have in setting up a movement at this point, referencing just the experience of even connecting with this lady in Afghanistan. And at what point or I guess a better way of framing it, did this become part of a mission for you as you were going through your career, or how did this piece evolve for you?
I think it crystallized, that it would be a better way of describing it. Once I retired, I heard later, once I retired, that I was a great champion of women whenever the work. I've never had this sort of obvious ambition to make sure that women are treated fairly and promoted fairly and remunerated fairly in the workforce, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But it certainly concerns me, and I think that I've worked in male-dominated industries, and I'm very used to being the only woman in the room. As many women executives who've experienced that, it's something you just get used to as any situation. But I also think, and studies show that whether it's McKinsey or Harvard or Boston Consulting Group or any of that, shows that when women are also in management at the top of management or in supervisory boards, profit increases for companies by 25%. Innovation, depending on how you look at it, between 16 and 60%. All of these kinds of things. So there's benefit to having
the business case is irrefutable, I think, at this point.
Yeah. So yeah. But it is still a struggle. I sit on 4 boards, and then when I say okay, and that we're all into diversity, by Jove, we're into diversity. At least gender. Let us not get into the other way. And I say, well, there's age, there's race, there's a lot of other things here, but okay, I'm concentrating on gender. And I strongly believe that if you had more women at the top in the C-suite, we would be better off. Also, the women would be better off. This is the Professor Linda Scott part about empower women's economic empowerment that actually contributes to GDP, therefore to our own well-being. They pay taxes, the family. There are a lot of benefits to it. But the interesting thing is that women don't aspire to that in the same way that men do. And women actually need a different kind of encouragement to want to have power and be very clear about monetary goals and ambitions for companies and for themselves. I mean, I hated any discussions about salaries. 99% of women do. Most people, I don't think, like to talk about it in general, but women really don't. And, so we've created an environment and courses and dialogue and mentoring around this to have more women want to aspire to being great leaders. and all around the world, even in extremely developed countries. I mean, I think the most developed probably is Sweden, and they've been at this a much longer time than many other countries. I mean, Norway had a 40% quota for women on boards about 10 years ago. There are different points of view of whether this is successful or not, but I know that without quotas, it ain't going to happen at all. It will be the exception. And when I talk to even my peers on board, they said, "Oh, Baiba, there aren't enough qualified women." I go, "Really? Really? Did you look? Where have you looked?" So, and apart from traditional roles like women being in charge of HR, very normal thing. Yeah,
Just
I digress.
that no, no, no. I'm just intrigued the experience from your perspective of being on a board, um, and you're literally the only woman. Like, what what does? Can you give us a sense of what that feels like, or how you navigate that situation?
You know, I was very lucky. I had a father who was also a business executive. I'm the oldest child of three, and we were always equal. There was, I never thought it was a second-rate gender, person. So for me, it was very normal to be in the environments that I was in. I think that I never really thought about it until I was about 50, and somebody pointed out to me how unusual, it is. I mean, there are some advantages of being the only woman because you can flirt, you know, and when you're also younger than most of the guys on the board, they really want to teach you things and stuff like that. So, that there are parts that are certainly better. But I think, and I know that from other women like myself, there is one, you know, birds of a feather flock together, they say. Men flock differently than women flock. The first lesson I learned in that kind of an environment was I need to be up on sports. I have absolutely zero interest in sports, any sports.
Yeah.
Always, but hey, I can talk soccer and hockey and tennis, as good as the rest. Because I knew that if I didn't do that, and also because I worked a lot with journalists in industrial environments, that's what boys talk about mainly, is predominantly about sports. The next one, of course, will be money in different environments. It'll be, stocks, trades, and la, 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 la. Even women in finance don't talk about that much as men do. They, well, we may talk about shoes, which may seem ridiculous to most men. Shoes are just as interesting as stock options sometimes. But you have to, I think, understand that it's very different. I've been in environments where I am of the only nationality. In other words, all the others are one nationality. I'm of a different nationality and background. And so you just learn to first listen, understand, where you are, and understand, try to understand where you're different and find commonality. For example, these days when you do a lot of diversity training in organizations, one of the first things that consultants would do with you is they train you to be aware of your own prejudice. Even if you think that you're the most open, tolerant person in the world, I've always thought so. And then I went, holy shit, that's not true, really.
Yeah.
All of us have prejudice somewhere,
A humbling
but
experience to acknowledge them, right?
yeah, and it's, as in all things, when you learn them, go, oh, really? And then you kind of learn to accept them and work with them and work with the environment that you've got. When I come from communication, ultimately from the broad definition of professionally of communication, and therefore what you learn there is how you can take on a lot of information, try to distill it, make it clear to others, but you have to be able to take on a lot of, information. And then the question is, whom are you disseminating the information to? If it's in English, is it an audience where English is the third language or fourth language? My sophisticated English won't go far. I've simplified a lot how I speak just because I know most people don't understand my vocabulary, especially when I'm trying to be precise. Scintillating is a word most of the people around me will not know. And they, and they speak English very well. So so it's those kinds of things, you learn. But it is, you feel patronized. I think the main thing most women will feel, I still feel patronized. I'm almost 70, kind of explaining things to me, mansplaining, as they say. And it's not ever meant negatively. I think that one thing you need to accept is when we did, for example, last year we did the summit, Novatore Impact Summit, and we had great sponsors, knew the sponsors, a bunch of them men. And then one of them calls me and says, Baiba, says, do you think I can come in to the event? It's women talking about, circular economy. It's not, we're not talking about tampons or, menopause. We're talking about economic issues. It's sponsored by Audi, this cool Audi at the back of the hall. And I said, do you think I could? I said, of course. It's like any conference of this, of an economic nature. Said, but there will be so many women. He says, will I not feel strange? And I said, well, welcome to my world. Of dark suits. Welcome to my world. So there we are.
What an interesting kind of experiential exchange,
Yeah. Yeah. So now we're sitting for the next summit trying to ensure we have a handful of men in the audience. It was not enough to have them on stage. We actually need them in the audience. Oh, yeah.
It's interesting though, this just this notion. I know of like you're surveying the landscape and seeing the opportunities of being the only woman too, but also do you find that you had to relinquish parts of yourself, like even making the concessions with, I'm not all that interested in sports, but I know if I want to play this game, and I recall even when I worked in banking earlier in my career, like I'd know people, even men too, right, like trying to keep up on things that they knew the boss were interested in even when they weren't. So I understand there's a degree of a game to it, but do you feel like that it made you like relinquish parts of who you were, or no? Okay.
I've never felt that. I think it could be that, I, to quote Frank Sinatra, I really did it my way. And I think that most people who reach fairly high positions just feel very comfortable with themselves. I think that there are things where you go, well, you can't do. It's impossible to do things 100%, and I don't think any human being really knows, what is 100% for them in a given time. I mean, you will certainly know what's not good for you, but the at the end of the day, I think that's the one day at a time mantra that I think is a very valuable one, because I think you need to, seize the day. I think if the pandemic taught me anything, it was don't put things off if you can. Are you wondering where your long lost, school companion is? Well, find him or her. Say hi. And if it's great, great. If not, hasta la vista. So it's those kinds of things, because I think that life is short.
Just in terms of this idea of comfort in yourself, is that something that I know you mentioned, like you're almost like strongly extroverted, that you also have this kind of trust or faith? You were kind of alluding to the idea that you're not like counting how many oranges you give me in expectation that I give you three back. Is this, how have you, was that trust thing an innate thing? Is that something that you worked on, or how would you kind of explain that?
I mean, things have not been perfect. I mean, when I was around 30, I thought everything in my life was wrong. All of my girlfriends were getting married, having children. Kind of, what's wrong with me? I'm living in
Right.
Europe, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, and fell into a bit of a deep depression, probably midlife crisis early, and I think I was smart enough, and actually at the behest of my sister, uh, uh, I went back to Toronto and spent a year in therapy, and that was really worth my while, really worth my while, because the therapist taught me to get to know myself. I was able to, close chapters of my life that I had subconsciously kept open. At one point, it really felt like, kind of physically, it's like in a book, and
Yeah.
ending a chapter and then moving on, and helped me kind of to take the next steps. And I've remembered all of those lessons when I've felt fairly frustrated or unhappy or whatever, in all of that. So I don't know if I'm just, replying to your question properly, but all I can say is things change. In the startup world, you maybe have listeners who come from that world, and the lesson I took from them, having been in there a little bit, and also with my partner in Novatore, is you know business people, especially who come from large corporations. They have a plan. They figured out the strategy and where we're going to go and what we're going to achieve, and they're not good at pivoting. They will
Yeah.
try to do whatever it is, come what may. And I have learned in some of the last 5 to 10 years is, you don't have to try to drive through that cave alone and just, one way. It is possible to pivot and say, this is really not working. Why are we bothering with this? Let's find the next thing. Let's kind of change. What is it that we're not seeing, or what should we be doing, or change things entirely? I think a lot of us have learned to do that now in the last 4 or 5 years. But I think it gives great freedom. Also in business, it's not just uh, it's not just in life. I see that in the different other companies that I deal with. But you have to be ready to pivot, and you have to be ready to say, okay, this isn't working. Let's go that way. But then
Yeah.
have the right people to journey with. You have to have the right traveling companions. Different roads, different journeys, need different kinds of traveling companions. Find the right ones.
Yeah, I love this, the kind of thread of trust through that response, in terms of trust, like facing some adversity, seeking guidance or support, and exploring that, closing chapters, and developing a trust within yourself through the process of knowing oneself better. And then even when you're talking about then business stuff, like you have more potential trust. Or I always think if someone sticks rigidly to a plan, even when the writing is on the wall, there's a lack of
They're
trust
just
or a
stupid.
lack of, in
Yeah,
themselves. Yeah, yeah. But
they're
there's,
just
it's kind
stupid.
of fear, like, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I have never. I don't. I rationally understand why Steve Jobs and Elon Musk are seen as some sort of giants. I think they're very lonely, nasty boys who got lucky.
Hmm.
And Jobs definitely much more so than Elon Musk. I think Elon Musk is just uh, bad for our society, bad for our community, bad for business. Maybe except for Tesla, but just we don't need billionaires of that kind around us. So I think that I keep on the same thing about what you give, comes around idea is when will Elon really get the backlash that he deserves? This, petulant boy, basically.
Hmm. Yeah, well, I think I was always a bit confused with Tesla when they had more in government subsidies than they did in sales, but that's that's another discussion, I guess. But in terms,
Yeah,
just when you mentioned this idea of most of your, like, when you look at some of the best decisions that you've made in life, and just kind of carrying on maybe even the
yeah.
thread of trust through your life, the most of the decisions you made were not made from were not rational decisions as such. Can you kind of elaborate on when you started to, or like big decisions that maybe you've made where that turned out to be the case, or when you started to notice this?
I've probably been like that my whole life. Let's put it that way. Let's start with that.
Okay.
Um, uh, I realized, I have a bit of a complicated life in terms of locations of where to live. You know, I feel equally at home in North America as I do in Europe, or in that, for that matter, in Eastern Europe. Eastern Europeans hate being called Eastern Europeans, but let alone post-Soviet. But they are very different environments, and I feel at home in all of them. And everyone from those environments sees me in some ways as a foreigner. So you kind of, there's a part where I'm a foreigner. Yes, you are of the family, but not really. There's a part of you that's different, which is true. So this was, so when I was, I guess, 16, we came back from my family from Germany, where in high school I was this class president. Late 60s, Germany is highly political. And then we went to Toronto, and the biggest issue is who's the captain of the football team. It's My sister and I were looked upon as very strange European birds, in all
Right.
of that. Uh, and so that actually teaches you to go with the flow a little bit. I think that's the intuition part, which part is me, which part is not. I know that what I made the move back to Europe intuitively. I mean, there was an offer there to do something, but it was, really, should I? Similarly, it is to move to the move to Latvia. It was, I mean, this is right at the tail end of Perestroika. The new republic is barely new. I mean, and it was as except my mother was scared stiff, what will happen to her daughter in these circumstances. Totally proud, but totally scared, at the same time. And it's those kind of things, and similarly in career decisions, of things that were offered. There were several. I tried some things that and failed miserably, and it was, I should have realized that, at the time, because intuitively something was off, kind of a thing. I should have listened to that intuition. Um, I mean, I don't think everything that I've done is totally intuitive, but I know that some of the things I said, well, I really should be doing this because we're actually either shouldn't have bothered, it had made no difference, or was actually negative. So these days, when I do have the choice, I who am a news junkie decides not to read or listen to certain kind of news because I know it'll just depress me. And so why bother? Kind of, it's a repetition of something that I know will depress me. I've been taught in or gone to places that are, in a communication sense, extremely closed. In the old days in Cuba, or go to Mongolia or something like this. And I know that if there's the kind of news that I really need to know, international or personal, I will be found.
Yeah,
There's no
yeah, yeah.
such thing as you need to be the first to know. But having said that, on the night of from the 23rd to the 24th of February last year, I lay in bed with my phone literally in my hand. I didn't sleep all night until at 5 o'clock in the morning. The rockets and the army came into Ukraine, and then I fell asleep for a few hours, and I realized that Now we are into a different world altogether. And then the question was, so when do the Russians come into my country? Because we're next. There is no question. Moldova may be there in the meantime, but Moldova will be easy from Ukraine, and then come we.
I know. I know what you're saying. Like where you're, what you, how you kind of identify it as, like in terms of nationality. Obviously, having grown up in Germany, spent time in Canada, and then obviously this connection with Latvia. Just going back to this idea there of your almost your mother kind of being simultaneously proud but fearful of what you're about to embark upon. Can you describe this kind of call, or this like this call to try to contribute to something in Latvia? Like what, like even, you have this career, you're highly, you've got all these options, I'm sure, and this is what you decide to do.
Well, first of all, it was for sure the great example of my father and my father's friends in Canada, who had highly successful professional lives, and they all had a second life, and that was the one about making sure that there's a free independent Latvia at some point in time, or at least that their kids would speak the language. I mean, any almost the immigrant societies in general, whether they're especially refugee societies, will usually be twofold. One will say, I want to forget absolutely everything that I've left behind. What my grandfather was like that. He said clearly, "Ubi bene, ibi patria." Where I am is my home. This in Latin, and much later, knowing of his history in the war, I understand why he was kind of dumb with all of that. And then the other ones I'd say, but I still want my kids to maintain nationality ABC. I mean, Netflix and TV today is flooded with Korean stories, for example, and that kind of a thing. So this was instilled into us. I have a sister and a younger sister and younger brother, and my sister and I probably was similar. This was, bashed over our heads, and both of us, first of all, fled from this. It was kind
Right,
of,
right.
no, this is all fine and dandy, but there's a big wide world out there, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
But both of us also went to visit Soviet Latvia, and that for sure changed my perception. If you talk to anybody who then go to see their family's roots in occupied countries, or run by dictators or whatever it is, most of them will have a very similar reaction. It became very real to me, and that's in the 70s, already. So that when independence came, I had been the head of the Latvian National Youth Association, lots of other stuff, did a Baltic Peace and Freedom cruise, outside of Helsinki and those kinds of things. And we weren't very many, there weren't thousands, but there were hundreds that followed the great thought of put your money where your mouth is. It was all about a free and independent country or region. Let's build democracy. And I had the privilege of being single, having enough money, having worked already in different places, saying, okay, I'll do this for 2 years. If I don't like it in newly independent Latvia, I can always leave. And I was very close to that, so I thought, nobody really wants me here. Why am I bothering, after 2 years? And then there were different kinds of things that turned unexpectedly, and voila, so here I am. But I think you'll find that today in Europe and in North America. I mean, I grew up also in a city in Toronto that has a huge Ukrainian or Polish communities, 100,000 plus. Mm. So those environments, teach you about back home.
Yeah.
And all of these societies have different developments in the first, second, third, fourth generation. It's how language gets diluted, let alone the great Irish diaspora,
Yeah.
this tiny little island with so many Irish pubs in the world, So the permeating music and, et cetera, et cetera. So I think everything is relative. I
Yeah,
don't know if
it's
I explained it, but it's
no, you like it seemed there were good examples in your life. There was like a tradition that was instilled in you
yeah.
as well, and there was just a curiosity, like or like some idea or like a mission that you wanted to take on to some extent as well.
Mark, I mean, I was part of a revolution. I was able to live in a genuine post-revolutionary society and in some way help shape it for better or worse, different story, but definitely part of shaping it, you know. And I know when history books are written, I won't be one of the first people that are there for sure, but possibly. But I know all the players, and in small countries, everybody knows the players. I even know them in the other two neighboring countries, So
Yeah.
I think it's uh, and I think it. I mean, I think it is very much about think global, act local. Everybody has to have a local place. If you don't, even crazy America with crazy, really crazy Trump and MAGA, what drives them is this one common feeling of home. That the craziness that is there that I think is extremely dangerous for the fiber of not only American but global society is also this: we need common values, we need something to hold on to, in a sea where America is actually fairly valueless, so with pockets of exceptions.
In terms of how you'd kind of see the not the arc of your story till this
Yeah.
point, like this so you have this very kind of multicultural experience growing up of different influences, then this idea you've just said there of almost holding both the global and the local in mind, and in terms of like coming to service to each other and common values and these kind of things. But having gone through having your own successful career, being the one lady in the boardroom, where navigating this space, but also feeling, having gone through your own kind of personal journey in terms of trusting yourself, finding out more about yourself, and navigating these spaces and feeling quite comfortable in this as well, even though you were aware of the anomaly that your situation was. And then as you moved through life, kind of focusing on other missions, then whether it's more women in business, human rights, then also just the idea of bringing like democracy to Latvia as well. Is that just, did your focus generally tend to just kind of project outwards once you had satisfied something for yourself in terms of your own personal performance, or how do you kind of see that
Mark,
shift in looking outside of yourself?
I am not that introspective at all and have never been. Let's put it that
Right.
way. I look at this younger generation to it that I'm looking at right now, let alone much younger, and amazed by the need for self reflection and self improvement, constant, around it. I don't know where that comes from. So that part is a little bit alien to me. Uh, I what I have learned many years ago. I was in a company that did a lot of psychological studies of their executives, and so I kind of know different kinds of psychological tests and all of this, and I know where I have been constant over the years, and for me those have been the best tools for understanding who I am and what motivates me. And one of them, can't remember what the name of it was anymore. Senior moment here, was that one of them uh, was based on the assumption that people are better doing what they prefer to do instead of trying to learn something that they really don't prefer to do. For example, I hate numbers in business. This sounds very strange, but if anybody makes me sit down to do the tiny itsy bitsy number stuff, it drives reports, expenditure, it drives me crazy. But give me numbers for sort of strategic analysis. It's a completely different thing. And I know that I'm much better in a tandem with somebody in a leadership position, or even just in an NGO or something. I need the CFO, the smart finance person beside me, and you can complement each other in that way. So I, for sure, the last 15, 20 years, I have last 15 or so years, I have always tried to live from a position of strength. Don't try to fix that, which is, why should I fix this? There has to be good. There are things that should be fixed, but or improved. But I don't think, and the older you get, I think the least you should concentrate. Be your, to thine own self be true. I'm full of platitudes today, but really, to thine own self be true. And I think that you will feel more comfortable with yourself, and the world around you, will feel better. In the last 5-8 years, I've also mentored different kinds of, not only women, but men as well. And people come up to me in this country, in any case, some others do, but mainly in Latvia, and say, you have no idea how you have influenced me. And I go, really? How?
Yeah.
And it's, so lead by example is, I think the more people who are naturally comfortable with themselves and just do things the way that they do, I'm not so sure that many actually think about it a hell of a lot. If you look at all of these family dramas, be it Succession or Succession is a good one, and we see some of them played out with the royal family, etc., etc. You never know what things are like behind closed doors. That's for sure. You never know what people are like, either in a formal business sense or in a family sense, or in a voluntary sense, or whatever. But usually, people show who they are, and great leaders are the ones where others follow. If you see a leader that is being followed, you can't. I'm of the absolute definite persuasion that you cannot teach that kind of leadership. You either have it or you don't. You can hone the skills of being a good leader, that's for sure. But you either have it or you don't.
Yeah, I think you're touching on something very interesting here, though, too, in terms of, I don't know, it seems like there's such a rush for people to figure or to think that they can eradicate all their what they perceive to be their flaws.
Yeah.
And I think, kind of as you're alluding to, as you move through life, and I'm seeing this myself. Like, I think it's kind of more coming to peace with the totality of yourself, and where can you best direct that, or what's the best fit in channeling that, or what's the best use for it. Because like you can read whatever books you want, you can do as many hours of therapy, you can do many things to try to change something, but I think a lot of us kind of remains consistent, and it's more our relationship to different parts of
For
ourselves,
sure.
whether that's coming into acceptance of it, and then it shows up less flagrantly, if you know what I mean, or I think we fundamentally, there's something in our essence that I think needs to be expressed. Like, if you can find an expression for it, I think that's a really helpful way of getting the most out of oneself.
I mean, we met learning about coaching. And this was I'm retired. I had to figure out what I'm going to do with myself, because I realized I was not going to, forever watch Netflix. And I know that I'm a good teacher. People like me to teach in whichever way. So the coaching process, which I did not complete, I completed it but didn't bother getting the coaching license, because I realized in the exercise, the coaching taught me much better how to structure questions, how to, it's like, I mean, I've been trained in negotiations, probably just like yourself, and sort of all of the different tools that were there, I still deploy today happily, some of them at least, not maybe, who knows, but a large part of them. But the interesting part was that, I'm sure it's in most of these coaching education, is that you'd have one-on-ones, you'd test being a coach on everybody.
Yeah.
And the big trick is the coach should never have the right answer. Your main task is for your client is to ask the questions so that he or she finds the right answer themselves. And I know that after every single coaching session that I did, everybody said, okay, that was really great, but what do you really think?
Yeah.
And, what should I do? And I thought to myself, now here's a hint. I will never be a coach. This is not going to happen. At this age, with this experience, and with my character, it ain't going to happen. But maybe I could be a very good mentor, or I'll put this to use in some other way. That's that pivoting part, where I realized that I remember struggling for a month. Should I actually try to get the license or not, or whatever, the certificate, and decided that for me would be a waste of time. There's no point in doing that because I will never start a business as a coach, because every other person will say, so what do you really think? And use that in a different way.
I like that. Baiba, just coming up to the end of the conversation here, and just, you've touched on so many things, like in terms of even just mentioning the word again, pivoting there. You've touched on, making alluding to the fact of trusting yourself, making rational decisions haven't necessarily been the way that you've made some of your best decisions in life. So there's an element of trust through it, an acknowledgement of life is this unfolding thing as well. You can, in hindsight, you can tell the story, but while it's happening, even as you alluded to your mission, it was crystallizing as you went through life. And I know you were mentioning the sense of life is short too, and just to go do it. Like if a friend is if you're thinking about contacting an old friend, contact them. It doesn't matter how it goes, just do it. And even mentioning this idea again earlier of leading by example, and so much of what you're kind of referring to is just getting out there and trying it, and then seeing how life plays out after you've done your part in the co-creation as such. Just to, as I have a tendency to do to finish these podcasts, just ask you one last time for yourself, how would you kind of categorize what is a good life for you?
I think, if the world were perfect, it's a day where you experience a moment of joy every single day. And joy can be a great risotto, a kiss on the cheek, wonderful music, feeling of success, whatever it is. I think that's really what one should aspire to. That for me is it's that joy. It's a kind of a life lessons from Marie Kondo. Doesn't bring you joy. So, I think there's a lot of that. And the other one is really living by the golden rule. I think whether it's individually or globally, business-wise, country-wise, global-wise, I don't care how you look at it. I really am the eternal optimist. And I think that if you go with positive things will happen to you, and even greater, the royal you, the community around you. So that would be the main thing. Good life is, good people and joy.
I really like this sentiment, and I even like the sense of even a moment of joy in a day. Sometimes life can be difficult and trying, but those moments are still there to be appreciated if we take the time, or if we pay attention to things as well. And just also this sense of I think we can kind of create our own world, or how we perceive our world is often framed by a lot of our own actions. So when you're talking earlier about you put something out into the world, that's going to greatly affect how you perceive other people and assume what they may do as well. So, Baiba, look, thank you so much for all the pearls of wisdom that you've dropped. I've really enjoyed speaking with you again, Baiba, and thank you very much for joining us on What is a Good Life.
Very welcome. God bless. Thank you.